All right, thank you. Carly and Andre have been very helpful in working through the logistics of Zoom. So let's start. One of the major elements of economic analysis is understanding employment and unemployment and the trends therein for whatever area you are studying. So that's a major category of data that you need to kind of have at least a fundamental understanding of where to go for it. So employment and wages, the go-to source for this is really the state's employment security site. There's a lot of data at the sub-state level down to the community level, statewide, county, and community. And they really do a great job of archiving data. So you can access data trends online. And Bruce DeMay is very accessible and helpful. I've given you, as you can see online here on the screen, his telephone number. And if you're really stumbling, by all means give Bruce a call. He's generally in the office and very helpful. So I'm going to try to, oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try to access that site. And this is the site that that link takes you to. And where you would want to go, first of all, this publication is New Hampshire Economic Conditions, is a monthly publication that you can subscribe to online, and is very helpful in terms of just general economic trends. And they usually have a focused article on one aspect of the state's economy. This is just something good to kind of keep track of that I read every month. And this one, as you can see, is looking at changes in retail trade in the state. As we go down, there's standard data sources that they continue to show. And this, as I said, is published every month. Unemployment rates by region makes it easy to keep track of what's going on in the state. That if you see the top line here, total non-farm jobs, 8,400 change year over year. That's probably the key number. When I want to know what's going on in the state's economy, that's the key number, job growth statewide. One general thing you should be aware of is there's two types of employment statistics. One is where the jobs are. This shows you that there were, in July of 2016, there were 667,000 jobs in New Hampshire, okay? That's distinguished from how many workers there were in New Hampshire, which is the second series, and that is the series that looks at unemployment rate. And if you look at here, there were, in July, 746,000 employed residents living in New Hampshire. So the two kinds of employment data, kind of important to keep them separate in your mind. One is the number of jobs, and the other is the number of employed workers. So anyway, this is a good general source for that you can kind of subscribe to, and it's quite useful. So that's one thing. Then they have themed publications on this site, as you can see here, 2015 in review, productivity. They do specialized kind of research over and above what's in that monthly publication. And then you go over to here, data and statistics, and you get a whole bunch of data series. Covered employment is the number of jobs in the state. Current employment statistics looks at the number of workers and trends therein. There are employment projections, which are useful. I've come to believe that no projection is ever accurate, but are they credible is the question. And I find these projections to be credible, and I do utilize them. For those of you that are regional planners, you can see here that they do employment projections for planning region. They look a little dated because it takes a while to get the base data assembled, but I just use the decennial, the 10-year projection, as you see. And let's just, if we click here, this is the long-term projection for, in this case, North Country Council, and the various planning regions are there. Show the base data, the change, and the percentage change. Any questions about that stuff? A lot of good data there. Okay. Okay, another source that I utilize. Another source that I utilize, not quite as often, but it's kind of handy, is County Business Patterns. This is a publication from the Census Bureau, Bureau of Economic Analysis, and it gives you good data on employment in terms of the number of jobs in an area. It goes down to the county level and goes down to zip codes. So for those of you that are looking for a specific community or a segment of your community and the kind of jobs that job distribution and trends therein, the County Business Patterns is a good source to go to. It's a little clumsier to use than some of the data sources, but if you are patient with it, it will show you the number of employment establishments by size of the establishment, number of workers, and it's really quite revealing when you get into it in terms of how few large employers we have in the state. Okay. The next major area that I thought I'd take, any questions about that data and that source, the data source? The next area that I thought would be useful to everybody is population and housing data, such as it's available here. One source that I utilize quite often is the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority site. And there is, as you probably, many of you have seen, the Housing Finance Authority's annual housing conference this year, which is coming up in October. They're going to be looking at the relationship between housing and economic development, which is really a critical relationship now, because on the one hand, we have an extremely low unemployment rate, which is making it hard for employers to add jobs. And on the other hand, we have expensive housing and a limited housing supply and limited housing production, which means that it's hard to attract new labor into the state. So we're kind of caught by our success, which is limiting kind of growth right now. So housing data is getting to be a very important aspect of economic development now, the relationship between housing and economic development. So this is the Housing Finance Authority site. You go down to here, housing and demographic data. Okay. And then you might look at demographic data. Right now, my screen's not showing the entire link. I'm gonna try something a little different. Oh, okay. Please bear with me. I have to use a different browser for this for some reason. Okay.
Whoops, there's a dot before the org that you include in there. Just need to get rid of the dot.
Yeah. Okay. This is not a problem with the site. This is a problem with this laptop. Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna go back. If you go to that link, what you'll find is really pretty good data at the state level, the county level, and the community level on rental rates, on housing prices, on demographics, and let me get this back up. Vacancy rates, rental rates. So it's a very useful site for housing. Also, what they do is they do compile data from the American Community Survey, and the American Community Survey is providing us with interim population and housing and income data for the state, counties, and communities. One word of caution, I think, in virtually every data source that you use will be tying in one way, directly or indirectly, into the American Community Survey. It is a survey, it's a sample survey. If you're using the data for small communities in the state, if anything other than a large community in the state or a county, the margin of error is so great as to render the data almost useless. It looks good, but in fact the margin of error is so great as to render the data nearly useless if you're looking at very detailed data for a small area in the state. Okay.
Charlie, did you see the chat question?
I have not yet. Russ, there's a question here from Shanna. And the question is, how does the New Hampshire Finance Authority get their vacancy and rental rates data?
Oh yeah, good question. They do a survey in the first quarter of the year at the community level of rental properties. And if you go online and look at which I really apologize as to why it's a little clumsy for me to get around on this. I'm not as conversant with it as I should be. But if you go online, let me try this one more time. I might be able to get there now. I'm sorry, it's really my laptop that's not cooperating with me right now. If you go online and you look at if you go to that link and you go online, Shanna, you'll see the sample size for the data as well. But it's a direct survey. They utilize call the larger properties in different settings, and then utilize newspaper advertising, and it's really very authoritative, and except in very small communities, very reliable data.
Thank you.
Okay. The New Hampshire Data Center is a great source. Okay. Office of Energy and Planning is a very good source of a wide range of population and some economic data for the state, including housing and household data, population estimates for cities and towns, very basic data, but good data. And as some of you know, population estimates, right now the state is updating its population projections, and it looks like we're actually growing slower than everybody thought we were, which was already very slow. So this data is population estimates by for each community by county, so it includes the counties as well. There's also a lot of links to, let's see. There's a lot of links on the site to a variety of economic data, property taxes, meals and rooms tax data, Bureau of Labor, a lot of links to the other sources that I've cited, here, including the Bureau of Economic Analysis and Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I think that there's another just basic and very useful site to become familiar with. The next one that I cite here is American Fact Finder, and this is the source that it's sort of the. Okay, somebody asking a question. I don't know. I hear something. That's all right.
Just background noise. Sorry.
Okay. The American Fact Finder is a really kind of difficult site to utilize. It is the source of all of that sample data that I talked about, and it's a little more difficult to utilize, but I think that you'll find that it is useful, but it's a site that's a little clumsy to utilize. And I think if you talk to the people at OEP, they can help, or Dan Smith at the Housing Finance Authority. Dan's got a health issue going on right now, but he can help guide you through it. The people at the Housing Finance Authority are very familiar with it, and I've been utilizing them to help me get through that data. I talk a little bit about purchase data, which I utilize. A lot of the times in my analyses, I have to combine different geographic areas. It might be a couple of counties, might be several communities, cross-county boundaries. And if you're doing a lot of data manipulation, it may make sense to purchase a subscription to a data source, particularly maybe at the regional planning level. I utilize Nielsen.com, and the link there would be answers.nielsen.com. The site is a little bit clumsy, but once you get used to it, it works pretty well. It's about $2,000 a year for unlimited use, and very useful. Charlie yesterday made me aware of, as I mentioned, the whole arena of data for economic development and housing is really changing fairly quickly. And Charlie made me aware just yesterday of a site, and I just tapped into it a little bit last night, and it looks very useful and very user-friendly. It's called headwaterseconomics.org, and is where to get to it. And it's really it looks very, very promising. There's a wide range of data sources. Let me see if I can open it. There's a wide range of data sources available, very user-friendly, and Charlie, I expect to be tapping into that more often.
I believe that the participants have been exposed to that.
Oh, okay, you know it already. Okay, yeah, you mentioned that. Okay, it's a good source. One of the things I do utilize often, almost, I'm on the site almost weekly, is the New Hampshire community profiles. These profiles are available for communities and for counties in New Hampshire, and it is put together by, by the New Hampshire Employment Security, and provides a lot of good data compiled on a consistent and annual basis for communities' population, jobs, labor force, unemployment rates, and very, very convenient and easy to use. It includes the same data in the same format, which is nice and convenient for communities and also for counties in the state. So I utilize that often when I'm trying to just get a good snapshot of what's going on in a community, the way the community stacks up against other areas, get population growth, housing characteristics, a real thumbnail sketch, but a good thumbnail sketch. Personal income, income data is hard to come by. The American community survey, which I referenced, that does the sample data, does compile data on income, and the source of that, one source of that is the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and you can just go to that site. What you get at that site is personal income and production levels, gross state product, at the county level and at the state level and the metropolitan area level. Very good trend data, long-term trend data available, so that you can track changes in income by industry, and it's useful. It's quite detailed. And personal income, per capita income, median household income, all compiled. One of the other things, quirks about economic data that you do have to be careful about is what is income? What is income? And the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Economic Analysis have different definitions of income, so you got to be careful to not mix up data sources. You have to stick with one data source which will have a consistent definition of income. For example, BEA's income includes presumed income as if you were renting your house to yourself. The Census Bureau doesn't, so a lot of quirks in what is the definition of income that can be disarming. So you don't want to mess around. National economic data. There's a wide range of data sources available for national economic data. The one that I utilize most often is the Federal Reserve Economic Data Center, which is organized by the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. Very good data, charting, shows all of the data series, and excellent long-term data. In most cases, for as long as the data has been collected, and you can customize the data range and the way that the data is displayed. So that's kind of it. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. And I know that you're all working on projects, and if you want to discuss your project and what you're running into, I'll be glad to see if I can provide any guidance.
Russ, I have a question. This is Charlie, and so my question has to do with, so as a researcher, I'm always looking at data sources and thinking about margins of error, sample size, etc. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of really looking at the metadata of your source, and even how you even can find out where the data is coming from and what that sample size and such might be?
Yeah, it's all of the population and demographic data, income data and whatnot, almost no matter where how you're accessing it, no matter what window or door you're going into to get at data like population, income data, most housing updates, is coming out of the American Community Survey. And the sample size, ironically, is not a whole, is not, the reliable sample size is not a whole lot different if you're analyzing the United States and trying to get reliable data, or if you're analyzing, let's say, income data nationally, or if you're analyzing income data for, let's say, the town of Gary. I know one of our participants is from data. You need about the same number of interviews. So you can imagine that if you were trying to get a reliable sample at the community level in New Hampshire with, you know, what do we have, 200 and some odd communities, the reliable sample size would be huge and unwieldy. Instead, the sample size gets, as you get more larger geographies and looking at the data and looking at it realistically the way things are today, as you get to larger areas, the margin of error gets smaller. I mean, I've worked in some small communities where, if you look at the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority site that I've referenced here, they will show you the margin of error. And sometimes you'll have a data, might be rental, people that are paying more than 30% of their income for rent in, citing the example, Gary. There might be there might be 150 households that are paying more than 30% of their income for rent. And the margin of error might be 75 plus or minus, which means that you have no idea what it really is. So you have to be very careful as you get to smaller geographies. Updated data, census data on basic population, housing units, households, the decennial census is 100% sample, but most of the updated data that you get on these variables is going to be sample data and really unreliable at the small area.
One just quick thing I would say about the Headwaters economic profile system is that in their reports, they color code many of the data pieces at the community level, and it indicates sort of if there's a challenge or an issue. It has a little footnote that says, this was based on a small sample size, or there were challenges in collecting this data, and it's a projection. So it indicates that, and it also gives you comparisons with national and or state data. Yeah,
I saw that. It's very tempting to use it because there's a number there, and sometimes I say that, numbers, of course, are very concrete. They all look the same. 150 is 150 is 150, but sometimes I wish that numbers had shades of gray in terms of reliability, because they're not all the same. Some of them are very sketchy and unreliable because of the sample data. The Housing Finance Authority, when they do their rental survey and their purchase price data, will blank out areas that the sample size is too small. And actually, you can adjust the sample size if you're utilizing their spreadsheets as to the minimum number of data points that they collected for that particular area that you're looking at. You can scale it up or scale it down. But as we scale it down, you do so kind of at your own risk.
No, I don't see another question, so I'll answer that question. Russ, a lot of the information that that I have been privy to that you have done in the past always has a compare and contrast with other communities and regions and statewide. How important is it to compare your information that you're gathering for your own community, whether it's the downtown revitalization or a housing study? How important is it to compare and contrast with other communities? And is it even important to compare yourself with other states?
Yeah, well, I think when you're dealing with data at the community level, just as no man is an island, no community is an island. So one of the things that's useful is to compare the community to its regional economic setting. And the concept there is to get at, in effect, market share. In a community, for example, one of the studies that we've got links to now is that Lebanon study, and you'll see in there for downtown Lebanon, I compare and contrast what's been going on in downtown to the community, and then I also contrast the community to the region. So it's kind of a building block approach, because a single development, there's one development that I'm looking at in Lebanon, apart from downtown, that's 350 housing units. The city of Lebanon has averaged the absorption of only 15 single-family units a year in and of itself. But part of that is because there just haven't been development proposals in the community. So if you look at the broader region, you can get a sense of market share. And so looking at maybe your community relative to the planning region, your community relative to the county. Some counties in New Hampshire are pretty good in terms of representing the regional economy. Belknap County, for example, is pretty good. If you're around the Manchester area, Londonderry's in a different county than Manchester. Londonderry's in a different metropolitan area than Manchester, ironically. So you want to be careful in defining what is the economic region. And I think that just in general, data in the abstract, where it's just numbers that say, our population is 15,000 and it's grown by 500 people, that's kind of dry. If you compare that and contrast it to the state and the county, just a lot more informative, of course, and particularly for the layperson.
Yeah. We have a question here, another question. On the personal income data website, can you break that down by age, specifically seniors?
You can get that data, not on that site. That site doesn't cross-tabulate household income by age. I'm not sure if Headwaters does that. They may. Nielsen does, and the American Community Survey does. You can do cross-tabulations of income by age. The Housing Finance Authority site will give you income by tenure, renters versus owners, and overpayment by age for renters and owners. So there is data available. The Housing Finance Authority would be the first place to go to kind of dig out income by age. And of course, as everybody knows, the state is aging. The last set of population projections for the state that were done, and I think maybe somebody knows specifically, I think maybe like 2012 was the base year for those projections. All of the state's population growth over the next 10 years was expected to be in the elderly categories, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. So elderly, the data for elderly, and you have to be careful interpreting it, because a lot of elderly households, their well-being is not structured by their income, but rather by their wealth. So if they are sitting on an IRA with a couple of $100,000 in it, and their annual income may be only $30,000 or $40,000 for the household, but yet there's a tremendous amount of wealth that can be tapped into. A fair number, so not 100% of elderly households have a significant amount of home equity and equity in their home. If you contrast that type of elderly household with a renter household that doesn't have any, there's a difference in well-being, although they may have the same kind of income. So you gotta be a little careful. I've been doing some elderly housing studies for the Housing Finance Authority, market studies, and you have to be a little careful interpreting what elderly income means. You will get a lot of overpayment for elderly households, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're struggling overall, because they may have a significant source of wealth.
Any other questions? Again, questions, you can feel free to type them in the chat box, or you can ask them verbally.
This is George, if you guys can hear me.
Yep.
Hey, George.
Hi, Russ. I had a question. I'm doing some work in Portsmouth, and around housing and affordability. And that question of income, even as we were talking in the office, I was using the Portsmouth, whatever the NECTA there, to try to look at that, talk about that regional economy, regional income, and then sort of contrasting that or casting that against local housing data in terms of, what the median sales price was, last year for a primary home sale. But we had some conversation back and forth. So getting to that, and I think that's household income used as opposed to family income. But there are a lot of different ways to cast that. And so I guess my particular question as a result, that's the project that I'm doing, is that a good choice, the NECTA, or, because I was trying to connect sort of the labor force market area.
Yeah, were you looking at regional household income versus City of Portsmouth housing prices? Is that it?
Right. So, because when I use the workforce housing law, the HUD data, I can get the regional, the median income, then the median then the house price in that larger area. But I was trying to look at, here's what the regional income is based on the workforce, and your median home price is $365,000. So I can kind of talk about that affordability, and then do that also on the rental side.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. I think you might look at some of the sub areas in that region, particularly, looking maybe a little bit more towards Dover, which is a different metro area than Portsmouth. It shouldn't be, but it's just the way.
Right. Dover wasn't included. You're right.
Dover and Rochester are considered an economic unit, but of course Dover really relates very strongly to Portsmouth, more so than to Rochester. But if you're looking at regional household income data, and you do want to use household income, not family income. Household income reflects people living in a a group of people living in a housing unit. Family income, for example, a single person is not considered a family, but is considered a household. So you just stay away from family income. Generally, I don't even know why we gather it anymore. It's really household income, because such a large proportion of our households are either one-person households or two people that aren't related, therefore they're not a family living in a housing unit. So you always want to use household income. That's number one. And you don't want to look at just Portsmouth's household income versus Portsmouth's housing prices. I do think you want to look at it regionally in terms of housing demand. I think supply you can look at locally, but demand, I think, should generally, which is based on household income, should generally be looked at regionally. Yeah, good approach.
Russ, we have a question from Jennifer Legue. Is what are your thoughts on Buxton, which I presume is a data source? And Jennifer's town's economic development committee or corporation has recommended that the town council that they use their services.
Say again, what was the question?
So the question is, what are your thoughts on Buxton, which I presume to be a data service provider? And Jennifer's question is, their town's economic development council has recommended that they use their services. So,
okay, I'm not familiar with Buxton. Is it a data source or is it a firm? Is it a consulting firm or a data source?
I'm unclear on that, really. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it is. They did a presentation to our Economic Development Council. I sat through it, and I walked away feeling as though I really wasn't sure what they do. I believe they are a data mining company that sources from credit cards and transactions either online or through credit cards, and they come back to the town and say, these are the places where your citizens and townspeople are shopping, and they try to find the right fit for companies to come to our town. But they want us to enter into like a $50,000 a year contract, and I'm shaking my head. Well, I see how much available data out there, there is out there for free. It seems like, shooting themselves in the foot.
It sounds like sort of target industries analysis at the community level, which I'm not, I never feel comfortable doing. I think that it's so site-specific and so peculiar sometimes. In terms of location studies, I know that your next session is looking at that, and it's probably a better question for the next presenter. But communities always, I think many communities want to know, well, what industry should we go after? And the truth of the matter is, they're probably much broader spectrum than a lot of communities think. And the location decisions, I mean, I really spent a lot of time on that when I was at Carolina years ago, site location studies and trying to understand, well, what makes one area do pretty well and another area not pretty well, and it's actually very complex. For example, at one point, ITT was looking at a site here in the Lakes region, and it got very, very close to locating a major facility here, and this was decades ago, so I feel comfortable talking about it. And it came down to the prospective plant manager visited the Lakes region and the prospective site, and ended up deciding, no way. The reason being that he said, look, if I locate my plant in New Hampshire's Lakes region, it's such an attractive region that all my supervisors are going to want to be coming here and visiting and spending time and looking over my shoulder, and I don't want that. And they ended up moving to New Jersey instead, just to avoid that. There was another one, a large insurance company that had actually acquired a major building in New Hampshire, a very sizable new building. Came here by helicopter, manager and his wife by helicopter, flew in, landed at the Manchester airport, visited the site. The wife went around and looked at the area, and they had already bought the building. It was a very sizable building. We're talking, a lot of money, and ended up not moving into it because the wife was concerned that the shopping wasn't good enough in the metropolitan Manchester area to justify moving there. So, I mean, some of these location decisions can be very idiosyncratic. So I don't know if that's a very long explanation, but I would just be skeptical. I think your skepticism might be appropriate, but I don't know the firm. They might do a great job, but I think it is something that you want to be careful about. You know, the state economic development office does a pretty good job of keeping tabs on what firms are looking for here in New Hampshire and how your community stacks up. So if you haven't already had them come down and speak to your group, I'd start there for sure.
Russ, if you don't mind my chiming in to reinforce that, Carmen Lorenz from Department of Resources and Economic Development, their outfit made a significant investment in MC, which is a data source and data provider, and she's training her staff to help communities with these sorts of questions, to do things looking at retail spending patterns, looking at cluster analysis to look at what potential industry clusters. So I think that you are exactly correct that DRED is a good stop to reach out to them to see if there's anything they can do with regard to data. MC is a pretty powerful resource.
Yeah, Carmen is also a pretty powerful resource. You know, she's done a great job first here in Belknap County and before that in upstate New York. So I would, you know, talk to Carmen first and get her opinion. I don't know the firm. Maybe they're very cost effective. Maybe cost effective for a larger community than Derry or a region, but I don't know the firm. I'd be a little skeptical and make sure before, you know, signing on that you are going to get what you're paying for and what you're hoping to get.
I think someone else might have had a question.
The big thing now, just generally speaking, in economic development here in the state is really labor force and labor force accessibility. So I think that that's the driving force in terms of location decisions. And then site availability. If you look at Pettingill Road, opening up the site via the development of Pettingill Road, Ray Resort Drive, made sites available. Sometimes I think that we complicate economic development planning and decision making. So once you get to the sub-state level in a place like New Hampshire, where we've got, you know, a total of 600,000, 700,000 workers, once you start scaling that down, it really right now, I think the two major factors are labor force availability and site availability. Labor force availability heavily favors southern New Hampshire. EFI, which manufactures digital printers still in Meredith, has decided to move to southern New Hampshire because of labor force availability issues. And so labor force is more available in southern New Hampshire, but you could maybe say that sites are more available in northern New Hampshire. Outside of southern New Hampshire, there's more undeveloped land available, in many cases served by utilities, often not. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. It's hard to find both in one place. So I don't know how that fits, but you know, it's not rocket science. Economic development is not rocket science, and I think that oftentimes we overcomplicate the analysis and whatnot. One other data source that I've been enjoying utilizing that I'll mention and wasn't in the PowerPoint, and some of you have provided it to me in Bedford, particularly, Rebecca will recall, and that's assessment data, property tax assessment data. Essentially, every community in the state now has, the data is a database, really, and you can access that database and really get a lot of great data at the local level. For example, screening by property type, by year built or year added. You can get square footage absorbed, acres absorbed. It's really a very nice resource for market analysis and detailed economic planning. And because it's available in most cases at the community level, I found it just very, very useful. I'm doing some work on, as some of you know, the widening of the potential widening of the Everett Turnpike between Bedford and down through Merrimack, where it narrows down to 2 lanes now, maybe looking at widening those 2-lane segments back to 3 lanes, and have gathered this data for Londonderry, Bedford, Merrimack, Nashua, so that I can really see in a very detailed level the pace of development activity by type of investment, office space, various types of retail, multifamily residential, hotels, lodging, and it's really a great data source and very accessible and apparently not that complicated to assemble. I've had good success in a variety of settings, and it's really very useful stuff. So,
all right.
Talk with your assessors. I hope that this has been helpful to you. Today data is, as I said, it's virtually a specialty unto itself. There's so many great data sources out there, and the problem is not that you have to drive to Boston anymore or Concord to get data. The problem is finding the right data on your desktop and the right source of that data on your desktop. So anyway, good luck, all of you. I think you have very interesting projects, and congratulate you on taking the time to go through this program.
And Russ, I want to thank you very much for participating this year. And as always, you've been a great resource to a lot of New Hampshire communities, and I know a lot of communities outside of New Hampshire as well. But we do appreciate you taking some time and spending with us with regard to identifying potential data resources, and that's some insight as your perspective onto trends that are going on in New Hampshire. So thank you very much for your time.